What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Mckeown, and I'm super glad to have you as a listener today. If you're new to this podcast, this is what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, assisting you in all aspects of your life, and helping you to get to new levels of pettiness. That's right. When they go low, we go lower. All right, now, if you've been listening along with me, you know that I am working on my Marie Kondo tidying. I am still working on it, but I am making progress. In the meantime, I wanted to make sure I made a new episode for you, and I decided to drop an episode about learnings that I have from the books and the 2 documentaries that I covered in this podcast. But I realized if I did that, it would be making you drink from a fire hose. It would be too much information to take in. So I decided to focus on the first 8 episodes of the podcast. And I'm not chopping up clips from those episodes. But what I am doing is picking some of the best teachings from the books Atomic Habits, Essentialism, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, and the documentary Happy. Now, if you haven't listened to those episodes before, I highly recommend going and checking them out after going through this episode, as all 3 of those books and that documentary are super helpful, and the episodes that I made on them do a thorough breakdown of the teachings inside each of them. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. One of the most important teachings from that book is for you not to focus on your outcomes, which usually leads to failure, to not even focus on your processes, which leads to less failure, but to focus on your identity. Because your identity helps you change your habits. So, for example, I remember hearing a story way back in the day about an Olympic swimmer who actually swam and trained fully on her wedding day. That's dedication. That is identity. When you say to yourself, I am an Olympian, I am a person that does not take days off. I put in 5 to 8 hours every single day, and that's what's going to make me great. So Simone Biles, as she was growing up, she started saying to herself, I am a gymnast. And she gave up what was a normal childhood. She gave up going to prom. She gave up so many things. And she took on the identity of a gymnast, and she said, I put in that work. I dedicate myself to this craft. And because of that, she went from being a kid that said, I am a gymnast, to now becoming the bona fide GOAT. And I hate using that term for any athlete because it creates all these arguments and all this discussion. But when you look at her resume, which I did before recording this podcast, there is nobody with a resume like hers. Now, you're probably not trying to become an Olympian. So instead of saying, I'm an Olympian, maybe you say to yourself, I'm an athlete. Or maybe you just say to yourself, I'm active. And when you say those things to yourself, you're going to start asking yourself, what would an athlete do? What would an active person do? And that'll get you to get out there and to practice the habits that you want in your life. Now, as I share this, one thing that James Clear warns against is don't be a person who has too much identity staked into one thing, right? Remember that you are many, many things besides the thing that you find your identity in. You are a son or a daughter. You're maybe a brother or sister. You might be a husband. You might be a parent. You might be a friend, maybe a telemarketer. And what you got to remind yourself is, yes, I dial up strangers, but I also do other things. And what I've learned in life is some of the most miserable people in the world are the people who have way too much staked in one part of their identity. Because, number one, what happens if you were to lose that identity? What happens if you were to get injured? What happens if you don't have those dreams come true? You're going to be miserable and you're going to feel lost. And I'm speaking about this from personal experience, but also when you have your identity tied up too much in one thing, you start making that thing the only thing that's important, and that's when you start getting desperate. And when you get desperate, you take desperate measures. A friend of mine actually competed against Lance Armstrong, and one thing he said about Lance is this: all of us cyclists who competed against him wanted to win, but he had to win. And when he told himself he had to win, he said, "I will win at all cost." And he paid a really heavy cost because his identity was so entrenched in being a winning cyclist. So don't be unbalanced like him, but at the same time, take on the identity of the kind of person that you want to become, which will help you make the decisions that move you towards your goals. Another thing from Atomic Habits is this whole idea of habit stacking. So, find something you already do and pair it with a new activity. So, look at your day-to-day activities and find what you do on a regular basis. For example, I decided to start looking at my finances while I'm pinching off a loaf, and now 4 times a day, I'm looking for fraudsters, making charges on my credit cards, and I am hyper aware of my spending. I got my mind on my money on my mind, and I'm stacking up my habits on company time. By the way, if you're not deucing on the clock at work, you're doing it all wrong. Now, besides habit stacking, James Clear talks about a commitment device. A commitment device is something you do where you have already committed to doing something, whether it's someone that you make plans with who's going to be waiting for you, or you already paid for the class that you're going to be taking. And the commitment devices that you need to choose are the ones that are going to hurt your soul by not following through with them. So, disappointing a friend, losing money, those things might hurt real bad. And one of the things that you can do actually is if you end up practicing a bad habit that you're trying to break, then maybe your punishment is to donate to your least favorite political candidate. And yes, that does leave you with less money to donate to RFK Jr., but it also helps you to get her done. Another thing James Clear talks about is the importance of your environment, whether we're talking about your physical environment and also your social environment. So, in order to win, maybe what you do is you replace your mattress with a weightlifting bench. Think about this. You can pump iron right before bed. You can pump iron first thing in the morning. You're going to be jacking up plates and getting swole. Now, another thing he says is you should join something where what you want to do is the norm and part of the culture of the place you join. For example, if you join a CrossFit gym, guess what? You're going to be going hard every single time you're in there, because that is just the way they roll. Or maybe you're a frat bro who just graduated college and you want to continue to live the best 7 years of your life. Well, here's what you can do. You can join a different frat at a college that's close to you, but not the same college. And then you just tell them you're a freshman. They don't check these things. But whatever you want to practice, there's a place and a space for you where that is the norm, and that's what you got to do. All right, so the next book we're going to talk about is Essentialism by Mckeown. And his book is all about doing what's essential and nothing else. So one thing he says is you need to be ruthless in choosing what you do. You got to pick a few things that you do, a few things that you go big on, and you eliminate what you don't do, which is everything else. So what are you going to do? You're going to sell propane and propane accessories. That's how you become king of the hill. Now in the book, he references Southwest Airlines, and their North Star is being the low-cost airline, and everything is all about saving money. Everything is all about being no frills. And funny enough, I was actually flying Southwest on my trip back from Washington, D.C. recently, and my flight was not delayed by the CrowdStrike hack because their system is so antiquated that they actually don't have that updated software. But they stay true to what they do, and that's what you got to do as well. Another thing he says is make no your default. Now, maybe you don't feel comfortable saying no, so Without straight up saying no, you could say, let me check my calendar, let me check my workload, let me check with my spouse and kids. And if you don't have a family, just make one up. But making no your default will help you from signing on to things that later on you'll regret. And as you interact with people, sometimes people don't respect your boundaries. And if they don't, what you got to do is you got to set up a social contract with that person. This actually happened to me recently. There's this guy, I'm pretty sure he's homeless, who's in my neighborhood all the time. One day he comes up to me, he's like, hey man, I just want to make a few bucks. Can I work for you real quick? And you pay me for my work. And I felt bad for the guy, so I said, sure. Gave him a few things to do. I paid him, and he was grateful, and he went along his way. Well, this same guy continues to show up at my house all the time and ask me for work. And it's not that he just shows up to my house all the time, but he also shows up late. He shows up at like 10 p.m. sometimes, 9:30, 9:45. And I always end up missing him because I put my phone away at night and I see it on my alarm app the next day that he showed up and what time he showed up at. And this has become pretty stressful. So a friend of mine, I was talking to him and he told me, why don't you set up a contract with him where you tell him, hey, come by every Sunday or every Saturday, once a week, and check in with me on that day only. And if I have work for you that day, then I'll put you to work. And if I don't, just come back the following week. And this is a really great idea. And the next time he stops by, I'm going to let him know that he is coming by too late, is becoming bothersome in a very kind way, of course. And I'm just going to let him know, come by every Sunday and we'll see if I have any work for you. Another thing that Greg talks about in his book is the importance of play and having time to think. And he says play, what it does is it helps release stress. It helps you come up with good ideas. It helps improve the executive function of your brain, which is the part that deals with decision making, problem solving, and planning. And he says play is not optional, play is necessary. And another thing he says is you need to block off time to think because you have your best ideas when you are free to actually spend time thinking. And as you spend time thinking, maybe you spend time in nature, maybe you spend time in environments that help facilitate your thinking because your environment matters. And you have a part in creating your own luck with good ideas. This is why I spend at least an hour a day showering myself with compliments. First, I build myself up, and then I build myself up more. But in all seriousness, you got to square away time. All the greats do it. The CEO of LinkedIn does it. Bill Gates does it. And if you want to be great, you also have to do it as well. Another really cool idea he has is when someone makes a request from you. And in particular, when your boss makes a request of you, he tells you to ask your boss, what should I deprioritize in order to do the new task that you gave me? Should I no longer pay attention to my emails? Should I stop contacting clients? Should I stop covering for you when you leave to play golf? Which one of these should I no longer do? And what he says is, number one, it puts the onus on them, but number two, they will most likely find someone else to do that task. The last idea from Greg Mckeown is asking yourself in any given moment the question, what's important now? Which spells out WIN or win. And I actually had to do this today because I was thinking to myself, I should make another post about the Olympics on LinkedIn. But as I thought about it, I was like, yo, I don't have the margin to make a really good post on LinkedIn and also to focus on this podcast episode and also to do the important things that I got to do today. And I actually decided not to post, which my former self would probably have posted and then been miserable because my schedule got too jam-packed. But now that I know better, I do better. All right, let me wrap up this book. You got to decide what you are choosing to go big on. Cut out all the other stuff and have no as your default. Make time to play and to think on a daily basis. Asking what's important now will help you reach your greatness. All right, moving on. The Happy documentary. I picked a couple from this one. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but one thing I think that we all need to do more of is to get into flow state. Doing things for their own sake, doing things that bring pleasure, doing things where you lose track of time, you lose track of yourself, doing things that make you come alive. The other thing I want to focus on is your need for community. Because if you live in the US, you live in a country that is all about being individualistic. It's all about self. It's all about my dreams, my goals, and all of those things. And not to sit here and say that's a bad thing per se, but you need people in your life. You need community. All of us do. This is the way we're wired. And you need to go out there and find folks to do life with. And if you're shy, guess what? You can find some people through a Craigslist ad, and you can build a new friend group through Craigslist, particularly if you have low standards. All right. So last, but definitely not least, the book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith. This book is a mental health toolkit, and this one was the hardest to pick out which ones I wanted to spotlight because there's so many good ones. Someone recently asked me what my favorite moment of the Olympics was, and I don't have a favorite moment because there were so many great moments. And that's how I feel about the advice from this book. But I did pick some of the ones that I thought were easy to grasp and actionable and helpful as well. One thing she says is to fight low mood, you gotta focus on the big five, which is exercise, sleep, nutrition, routine. And when she talks about routine, she talks about having a mixture of predictability and adventure. And of course, human connection. When you focus on these, you will do much better in life. When you focus on these five, a lot of things just automatically fall into place. Another topic she talks about is thought biases and what they are and how to combat them. So, mind reading. This is something that I do all too often. What this is you start thinking that you know what the other person is thinking about you, and you can get into a real bad place real quick by doing mind reading. And she lists a bunch of other thought biases as well. And what she says is when you start having thought biases, you need to get these thoughts out of your head. You need to write them down and also talk to people because people are the remedy for rumination, for spiraling. And you should have in your Rolodex 3 or 4 people when you're in a bad place that you can reach out to. You can text them and say, hey, are you free to talk? Or you can just give them a call. I remember a couple different occasions I was dealing with teacher stuff and some of the stress that was coming along with it, and also doing some rumination of my own. And on 2 different occasions, I was talking to my one friend, Brian, who is not a teacher. And then a year and a half later, I was talking to my friend, Drew, who is a teacher. And just by talking through my thoughts, I was able to chill out. I was able to deal with the rumination and also to have more peace about the future than I was having in the moment. So get those thoughts out of your head. And as you're struggling, another thing she says is practice self-compassion. And ask yourself, what would you say to someone you love? Because you got to get your own back. And what you should never do is kick yourself while you're down, which is something that people often do when they're on the struggle bus. Here's another great tip. She says, when someone is in a bad place, she gives this whole list of all these different things that you can say and do with them in order to help them through what they're going through. So one tip she shares is walk and talk with them. Because when people are walking, they are more open to sharing as their body is moving. but they're also not across from you and you're not across from them. So it's less intimidating. Unless you're walking and talking with Chuck Norris, because it's actually impossible for him to be less intimidating. Another great tip by Dr. Julie Smith: when you have anger, you must get rid of that anger one way or another. Now, getting rid of anger could be screaming into the void, it could be breaking dishes, it could be doing Wim Hof breathing exercises, it could be doing exercise, but something has to happen physically with your body to get rid of that anger before you can start to come down and be zen. Now, recently I was angry because I felt like my needs weren't being met by someone in my life. And because of this podcast and because of the things I've learned through the books I've read, I've learned to change my language from I'm mad at someone to I'm mad and I'm upset because I feel like my needs aren't being met. But anyways, it was 9:15 at night and I was angry and I said to myself, I got to do something about this according to Dr. Julie Smith. So I took my washer and dryer, I pushed them apart, and I used them to start doing tricep dips with a weighted vest on. Now, it is my leather vest, and it does weigh 23 ounces. But if it weighs over a pound, you get to claim it's a weighted vest. So anyhow, I did a few dozen, 100,000, I can't remember how many I did, dips with a weighted vest. And afterwards, I felt better and I could calm down. I could go to sleep. And if you feel anger, what you got to know is you have to do something with it. And if pulling weeds out of someone's yard is something you need in order to get some exercise and some of that energy out of your body, I guess I will allow you on my property to help you out. Another thing she says is, as you are stressed out, as you are feeling anxiety, you have to use your breathing in order to calm you down. So what you got to do is you got to slow your breathing, and your exhales need to be longer than your inhales. That will calm you down. And on the inverse of that, if you want to become more alert, if you have maybe an athletic performance that you got to do, having longer inhales and shorter exhales, what that'll do is it'll put more oxygen in your brain, it'll make you more alert, and it'll make you more activated. So use your breathing to regulate your mood. Okay, home stretch, a few more, and we're done. When you are feeling an emotion, what she says is you need to name an emotion because it helps you to figure out what to do when you're in a bad mood or even a good mood. Sometimes you know why you're upset or you know why you're happy, and sometimes you don't. So, for example, maybe you're sad because your stepmom got sent to prison, or you're sad because your stepmom got out of prison. Well, that's pretty much a no-brainer, right? But sometimes what you got to do is you got to get more specific on what you're feeling. So, for example, you might be feeling sad, and then a subset of being sad is being lonely, and a subset feeling of that is feeling isolated. Well, if you realize not only are you sad, but you also feel isolated, the medicine you need is to find some people to hang out with. So always name your emotions so you know exactly what you're feeling, so you know exactly what to do in the situation. Okay, now, so as you're going after your dreams, you're going after things that you want, what you're going to have to do is do something different in order to get a different outcome, in order to experience life to the fullest. What she says is you got to step out of your comfort zone, but you also need to stay out of your panic zone. And what you need to do is you need to step into your stretch zone, which is the zone that is a little bit out of your comfort zone, but not so much that it'll put you in a full-on anxiety attack. So, for example, maybe you're afraid of heights. Well, bungee jumping would be in your panic zone. So that's not an option. But you have things that are in your comfort zone as well with heights. For example, maybe looking down on people is in your comfort zone. These are jokes. But doing something that is not far from the ground is within your comfort zone. And so what you got to do is step into your stretch zone. Maybe you go take a ride on a float during the Macy's Thanksgiving parade. Boom, there you go. You're in your stretch zone. You're waving to the people. And you're on national TV, hoping you don't make a fool of yourself. Good luck. All right, let me wrap up that last part real quick. Yo, you want to stay alive, you need to focus on the big five. I'm talking about exercise. I'm talking about a whole bunch of things that you put in your body. You can't be sloppy with your eating. You need to be feeding yourself right. And I'm talking about sleep. I'm talking about REM, just being deep. I'm talking about a whole bunch of things like routines. And that's what I'm saying. So do your thing. Link up with people. That's what you got to do. And that's what I'm doing. I just drop a few thoughts up in your brain. You might be spiraling. You need a lifeline. You need to write them down. You need some people to help you off the ledge. And that's what I'm saying off the top of the head. You need to be fed self-compassion. And that's what I'm asking you right now. What would you say to someone you love? And that's what I'm saying. Big old hugs, a whole bunch of things, walking and talking. And that's what I'm saying. You just got to be rocking with physical movement. You got to be choosing to get that anger out of yourself. And that's what I'm saying. It's something that's felt. It needs to just shoot out. You all just move out all the time. I'm talking about my breath. I'm talking about how I get rid of a whole bunch of stress by exhaling, and y'all come through and no, I'm not failing. If my exhales are longer than my inhales, then I come through and y'all just never fail. I be feeling much, much more calm. And that's what I'm saying. You got it going on. If you want to get quite alert, you got to inhale big and go berserk with a whole lot of oxygen to your brain. And that's what I'm saying. Just get insane. I'm talking about how you need to name emotions. That's what I'm saying. You got to be dope in this whole city that I'm talking about. Help you figure out what you got inside of yourself. Maybe you're isolated. Y'all come through and you need to create it, the situation to remedy that. And that's what I'm saying. And that's a wrap. I'm talking about how you need to step out of your comfort zone. You got to be here. You got to just stretch yourself all the time. And that's what I'm saying. So you could just climb straight to the top. And that's what I'm saying. Come through hot. Yo, I'm just slaying. Spit out the top. And that's how it go. Julie Smith's teachings up in the flow. All right. That's it. That's the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot from it. And if you feel like you just drank from a fire hose, remember that you can always come back to this podcast episode. You can always take in this episode in sections. But I do hope that you walk away with at least a few things that you can implement in your life so that you can make your life better. If you're new to this podcast, please hit the follow button so you don't miss future episodes. And if you've been listening, please rate and review the podcast. That helps a lot with getting the word out. And if you think of anybody who needs to hear this message, please forward it to them. I want to give a big shout out to my dude, Siraj, for making the instrumental for this podcast. And I want to shout you out for all the awesome things you're going to do with the things you learned in today's episode. This is Your One Life. I'm Mckeown. I hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace!